Hi, Sue. Thank you very much for joining me today to talk about your crowdfunding campaign. This is, I think it's the first book campaign that we are going to talk about from crowdfunding. So welcome. If you want to just introduce yourself and obviously your crowdfunding project so that our audience can know what you were up to.
Excellent, of course. So my name's Sue Anstiss. I have worked in sports PR for 30 or so years. I'm a sports PR agency. The last 10 years, much more in the space of women's sports. So it's been a passion of mine. I'm a trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity. I set up the Women's Sport Collective, a network for women working in sport. So that's kind of my drive really, is around women's sport and the wider piece around equality and why women's sport matters, that we are so far behind the men, but why we're catching up rapidly, what's made the difference. So I host the Game Changers podcast as well. That's, I guess, me, and I wear many different hats now, but all to do with women's sport and driving women's, the profile of women's sport, funding into women's sport, and female role models, really.
That's really cool. And then with all of that, when did the book idea come into existence?
I'm sure, like many people, I've always felt there's a book inside me. I think even I studied English and sports science at university. I think I've always wanted to write. I've always thought I wanted to write a book. I probably thought I wanted to write a fiction book rather than a non-fiction. But the idea, I guess, came together probably on the back of the podcast. So the Game Changers celebrates trailblazing women in sport, and we're now on 66 episodes. So my initial idea was that I would take all those amazing stories and create them into a book. I think that was my thought process initially. I spoke to a fabulous agent who was actually a wonderful book, Eat, Sweat, Play, Anna Kessel's book, that inspired me. It was the book that I read her book and thought, I wish I'd written that. That was a couple of years ago. But I spoke to him about doing a book about the Game Changers, and he kind of put me in the direction of more of a journey of my journey to look at why women's sport is where it is today and what's changed and what we can do, almost a manifesto, something with a bit of hope in terms of what we can do moving forward. So that our idea was probably, I do know exactly the date because I was out walking with a friend and she said, what are you waiting for? When I said, one day I'd like to try a book, which was September, I think, 2019. And then across lockdown, really, and last year of being at home and had more time, although it was weekends that I wrote at, that's when I cracked on and got writing it. The crowdfunding started in March, April time. So it was the proposal for the book was around Christmas time. And this is, I guess, comes onto the crowdfunding piece. I was going to go and find a publisher. So I was talking to this agent. I was going to go and find a publisher for it. It's really topical. So that was the next step, is I could go out and find a publisher with an agent. But that would all take, I realized the process was quite slow, and I'm not that patient for things. If I want to do it, I want to do it and make it happen. And I wasn't really prepared to spend a year touting the proposal around people and getting a publisher and what have you. Which is when I then came across Unbound and the whole concept of crowdfunding for your book. And a lovely lady, Catherine Spencer, who was the England rugby captain, had written a book, Mud, More, Mascara, and she'd done it with this process. I went to her book launch and I thought, well, that's really interesting, isn't it? That actually you could take some control. I thought it would be easier than it was, but we'll come on to that in a moment. But then to raise funds to cover the costs of the book, and I could just then crack on and write it and get it out there. So that's kind of why I came across it. For me, it was probably a little bit around impatience. I do believe from the interest that's out there and has been since, I think there is a place for this book, and I think I would have found a publisher. I just think I wasn't really prepared to wait as long as it might have taken. So that's kind of how it started. So I think the decision, the proposal, everything was Feb, March, and then it was April, May time that I started the crowdfunding.
That's cool. And you said you came across Unbound at that time. Had you had much knowledge or experience of crowdfunding prior to deciding to crowdfund?
Not personally. It's funny, isn't it? I think I've always been a massive fan of the concept of crowdfunding. So I remember right from, and Women's Sport Trust are bored of me banging on about it, but from Obama and that whole idea of gathering a little bit of money from loads of people who then back your campaign initiative, and then not just their money, but them buying into what you're about, and everyone giving a bit, has always resonated with me for some reason. I just love that idea of and I think I have added to crowdfunding, so I've dabbled a little bit myself on things where I feel inspired and I'd wanted to get involved. So I guess from that side I have, but nothing more formal around properly going out and raising a lot of money or a chunk of money to do something. So I was aware of it and the concept of it. And on the book side, I guess one thing that is interesting is there is that self-publishing, almost like a negative vanity publishing. Oh, you've paid for this book yourself. And I do think at the time, so I get not defensive about it, but I think that I remember Kath going, this isn't self-published, this is crowdfunded publishing, and it is a different thing. And I don't think it really matters either way. The book comes to life and it'll be in all your local bookshops and Waterstones and Amazon. That's fine, isn't it? But I think this was a different way of doing it to just paying for it yourself, really.
And so how finished was the book by the time you launched the crowdfunding campaign?
Not at all. Hadn't even started writing it at that point, which is kind of interesting. So the concept with Unbound is that you obviously they have to buy into your book and they have to believe in it and believe that you're going to have the wherewithal to be able to raise money to fund it. And some people come with a finished book that they then want to bring to print, but the majority haven't written the book yet. And actually I said at the time, should I be writing the book alongside the fundraising? And they said absolutely not. Get your crowdfunding sorted first, because it's hard work and it takes time and it needs your energy. And actually lots of things I learned from you, from the lovely session that you shared with us, I now realise. But that initial push and that getting over, if you do it on a really laid back way over a long time, it's never going to happen. So actually you need to put your effort into making it happen. So so I hadn't written it, which is kind of ironic. So people were pledging and saying, well, when's the book coming? It's like, oh yes, I'd like to know that too, because I haven't written it yet. So that was kind of weird, almost like getting it funded and some people thinking the book's going to arrive next week. I've funded it, but actually I hadn't even been written it yet. So I didn't shout too much about the fact that I hadn't written it, although actually that was I was never denied that was the case. I was getting it funded in order to write it. And in theory, if I hadn't got the funding, then I may never have written it. I think I would have done anyway, but I might not have done. So yeah,
it's really interesting. So just two questions off the back of that. My first would be, do you think the book changed in any way because of the backers and the fact it's more crowdfunded? Do you think you changed anything about how you wrote it or the story that you told because of all of that? And then secondly, like, how did you deal with the pressure that 725 people are waiting for a book and you're there, like, maybe waking up on a Monday morning with writer's block?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So I don't think anything changed about the book because of the people that behind it, or the people that backed it. I guess it just showed me that there was a real interest in it and a passion for it, etc. But I don't think I changed anything around the content with that in mind. And I guess there was pressure. I remember when I got it funded, is that whole thing of, oh my Lord, it's funded. Oh, now I've got to go and write the book. So I did dally around a little bit for a couple of weeks, and lovely Kate Hannon, who you know from the Women's Book Collective, who works with me, I remember her and Naz, me messaging them saying, I just need to keep researching how to write a book. How do I get started? And they said, and do I do a plan? And they said, I think you'd better start writing. And it was like, how do you go from nothing to what was the ambition was 70,000 words? It was actually 86,000 words in the end.
Wow.
But once you get going, anyway, anyone who wants advice on writing a book, I've got a fail-safe method now. But it was just like getting started. So that was daunting. I did have a few sleepless nights when I was funded and thought, oh my Lord, I've got to get from here to having a book. And they give you up to 6 months. Some people take a year from when they're funded, but I knew that I wanted to get it. I had it in my head and I knew that I wanted to get it done in that time and as quickly as I could, because even though it's been done really quickly and I did write it, absolutely everything hit the deadlines, it's still a long time from when those earliest people that funded it back in April don't get to see the book for 18 months. And it's a long time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then how do you think it felt I mean, obviously we don't know, but if you'd have got a publisher, how do you think it would feel? You know, you're like, okay, I need to write for this publisher, and essentially like my audience that's going to buy the book is massive, versus like 725 people. Like, which is scarier?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just really interesting, isn't it? Because I think the audience will still be massive. I think, you know, there's
because this is just your initial audience.
Yeah, exactly. And actually it gives you a great boost because you're up there. So as soon as the book comes out, it's already sold over 1,000 copies because it's gone to all those people and schools and so on.
Yeah.
And and that's, I guess, the thing in my head. It's almost like people know it is still a very credible, like it's not a real publisher. So Unbound work with everything in terms of the editing process, the cover design, the proofing, the page proofs is exactly the same as would be with Penguin or Random House or anybody else. So it is a really authentic publisher, and their sales team are out, and we're talking, as I say, it's already for pre-order, quite scarily, on Amazon and Waterstones, or Smiths and Barnes and Noble and Foyt, it's everywhere. So they are out there doing that. So that scariness of it being everywhere is no different. There's extra pressure, I guess, because I've had to keep people informed, and I'm slightly conscious of like, just it's coming. So whereas if I had just written a book, people might not know about it now, and I'd be entering this period in June, July, August of like it's coming in September, whereas now these people have been along the journey for the whole 18 months or a year and so on. So that feels slightly positive, you know, that's really lovely in a way, but there is some pressure of like, oh my Lord, I hope it's worth waiting for when they eventually get there and read it. Like they, I
mean, 100% sure it is. Okay, so let's come on then to the crowdfunding process. How much did you research? I mean, obviously you researched how to write a book, and there's a lot of research that goes into that. When it came to the crowdfunding process, what was your kind of strategy in terms of that?
Yeah, a lot of that was driven by Unbound. So they're very good. They kind of give you guidelines in terms of what you should be doing. And I think they took me on knowing that I had a great network. I've got, you know, really, I guess, high numbers in terms of social media, and with that's LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. So I think they saw that I had a, you know, a network that I could access. I mean, there are people that start their crowdfunding with Unbound, and it's literally friends and family, and they go from there. And some of them, you know, I started the process, I'll come on to it in a minute, but some of them are still fundraising now, 18 months after I started the process. There are books that are still on when I first came on Unbound. So so I think that they recognised that I had that audience, and actually I was really passionate. I've got a marketing comms background, so in a way, yeah, I was an ideal candidate for them in that I was quite specific in that I had a cause. So it was around women's sport, and I was very passionate. It wasn't as if I was just writing a murder mystery, and if you like me, please fund my book, it will be really good to read. There was more of a message around the book in itself too. So I think all that definitely helped, but it was still really hard, but that helped. So your question was, what did I know about it? I didn't really know that much about it. I thought it would be so much easier, and it was much harder than I thought, but the guidance was what they had given me in terms of put these posts out, you do this on social media. But I was quite adept in terms of using social media just because I've worked in comms for 30 years. So from that point of view, I guess I had some of my own ideas and things there too.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot that it was hard. Like, what are just a couple of the things that you think were hard, and like why?
Yes, I think of things. One of them is that they said is there'll be always people that you think love you and know you and would obviously fund your book. Why would they not? And some of them don't fund until right at the end. So there's lots of people. So people with the best will in the world might want to back you. I think the thing with Unbound is people need to go on and register and put their details in, and that's a bit different from just swiping or Apple Pay or some things. I think the world's got easier to give money on lots of systems, and I guess in terms of the crowdfunding work you do, there are things when I know I can crowdfund or you know, giving charity, etc., where I'm all set up, so I can just press a button. It's really easy. Whereas with Unbound, there's a little bit of I've got to go on and give my details and my address because it's got to be sent to me, and you've got to give a lot more. So I guess that the hard bit is almost the people that you really love and love you, and you think, well, of course they're going to support it. Why would they not? And they don't. But you don't. I guess you don't know who those people are. It's only at the very end when people are coming and pledging, and I'm thinking, oh my Lord, were you not there at the beginning? Like, why would you not be? And actually, people even now in recent weeks, now it's closed, you can't get your name in the back of the book anymore. People going, oh, I missed the opportunity to. Like, oh, I was telling you about it for a year. How could you miss it? So I guess that's hard. And then they kind of keep going back to people and back to people. And that's why I think I'm really pleased that I worked really hard and got it out and did the PR on it in that shorter period of time. But I had a lovely friend of mine who was about, right, oh, were you writing a book? Oh, I had no idea, like quite sarcastic. Because actually all the time you're sharing, oh, I'm at this percentage, please give. And so that's hard to keep going back to the people and needing to ask them for money, really. So I think that's always hard. I think that was harder than I thought it would be, because I believe in it. I'm really vested in it, and I think you're going to, and I know what you're going to get on the outset. I think it's just hard to ask people for money, really.
Do you think that was made harder given the whole COVID situation as well? Or do you think that would have been equal amount of hard if it wasn't COVID?
Yeah, no, I think it was probably equal hard. I think obviously I think it was easier for me for writing because I wasn't doing anything else.
Yeah.
I think it's probably harder for fundraising, and I wasn't going to conferences and events. I think if I'd have been out more seeing people at events and networking, I might have had more of an opportunity to say come and do it. So I think that it was all done digitally, really kind of trying to access people. So I think that probably made it a bit harder.
Yeah, and that follow-up as well is, yeah, it's the worst bit about crowdfunding. It's the hard back on, but like you said, it works. You know, they may have been at lunch the first time, they may have been taking the dog for a walk the second time, and that third time hit them at the right point.
Yeah.
And I also really like what you say about the people that you thought give that maybe don't give until the end of something. I had one client and her boyfriend just didn't back the campaign. And, you know, bitching down the phone at me about why does he not love me?
I know, it's bizarre, isn't it? There are definitely people and family members too. You think, well, how would you not? And actually, it's only 20. And actually, the ebook's 10 quid. For the love of God, just give me £10. I'll do it for you. So that's interesting. And actually, I started early, so I got some people on board, some lovely close friends, whatever, to be early. And then he went on me saying, I'm sure, but my lovely twin brother, unexpectedly, made a really substantial donation. So on what's different with Unbound is you can just pledge for a book or you can pledge for an ebook, and there's all other pledges that they do to make it more interesting. So you can get a quirky tote bag with rude things people say about women's sport, there's a mug, there's a whatever. I can come and give a talk in a school or a college, you know, whatever. You can donate to school. So we created those pledges at the beginning to make it a little bit more interesting than just buying a book. And there's one like a be a game changer level where you get loads and it's really expensive. And so I was looking at my number, you know, like you do that whole, you talked about that, didn't you? Every like, 1%, 2%, whatever. And all of a sudden it jumped to 8%. And he and his lovely wife, Vicky, had made a massive pledge overnight, didn't tell me. So that was lovely. And that gave me a real boost. And also it took it to that level that people then thought, oh, this is kind of really happening. And that momentum is so important, I think, isn't it, at the beginning?
Yeah, and it must also just be so crazy, the feelings to go from that 1% to that 8% to 169% from like 725 people. You know, what kind of percentage of that 725 people did you know beforehand?
Yeah, I think I knew a lot, but as we moved further on, I knew less. Although, as again, I think I have got, I guess it's that LinkedIn type network and Twitter, people that I feel like I know them, but I've never met them. So that whole, I know them, but I don't know them. So I think it started off, it was very much my close friends and family and all those things. And then as it expanded out, it went into others too. I think probably something I could have done a bit more of was tapping into other groups. So I did get some from the Loughborough alumni group or from finding other groups of pockets of people on Facebook, the school, or, you know, all those kind of things to reach those people too. And I think it's recognizing that even though there might be 500 people there, you're only going to get 5 or 6 that are ever going to fund or going to be asked to go online and do it and fill it all in and everything too. So yeah.
And then when you were doing your marketing, you speak about that, and obviously you have a background in marketing and comms. Like, what type of outreach did you find worked the best for your campaign?
Yeah, Twitter's was really effective. So I did put it on some newsletters and things like kind, but actually just regular tweets. Again, it's like getting it in front of people. So I think, and that ease of putting a link so people can go straight from there to the link, that was probably the most effective. So although I say I wasn't at events and I wasn't meeting people, actually there's a digital side that makes it really easy for people to go through and to link into. So that definitely made it easier. And then yeah, it's a bit of Facebook. They do give you the piece of where it all comes from, but it's Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. I did a bit on LinkedIn where I went round and actually created little groups of people and said, I'm writing this book, if you'd like to pledge, what have you, and then someone would leave the group because they weren't really interested, and I'd usually get a couple of, so if I did some work, it took work, but if I went and approached and spent a half a day approaching loads of people, that got result, that kind of moved things on too. So but yeah, it takes work, and it's like you don't want them to keep doing that, and then the next week they sit again and they say, I don't want all I was sharing to be about trying to fund Game On.
So how did you manage that with different posts and different content to keep their excitement and your own excitement up, really.
I guess it's just judging the mood and making sure you're sharing at the right time and not over sharing too much too. So I mean, obviously it worked for me, and I did get funded really quickly. So I think the average time to fund is, I don't know what they did tell me the stats at the time, but it's something like 9 months, and I did it in 3. So actually I was much faster than traditional books are funded. And there are people, as I say, that are in, there's a couple of chat rooms where were really working hard to get themselves funded, just to scrape over that piece. So that did make a big difference. I had Vitality come on board towards the end. So Vitality came on board and said they'd really like to back it. So they put a chunk of cash in, and that helped us get to another stage. And actually, when you get to 95%, then you're home and dry. So it's that whole thing of, as soon as people can see it's definitely going to happen and they want to be part of the excitement, they don't want to miss out, then that's, I got that flurry that took me to 130, and then since then it's kind of continued on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a failed campaign like 90% or more. So it's just like, well, obviously you're that close. Why wouldn't we fund it?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And then you've obviously crowdfunded now for this book. Would you consider crowdfunding again in the future for other things other than a book? Do you think that process would be very different?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because actually I could crowdfund for another book. So there are authors on Unbound that come back. There's a guy, I saw one last week, and he's funded really quickly, that said, thank you so much, it was great, whatever. So I guess a bit of it is the success of this. If this book comes out and it's a success and people really like it, then actually there is something to be said for actually just go and do it again and crowdfund again. I am going to answer your question as well around would I do it for something else. I think I would do something different and working with other people. I think it's like sponsorship in a similar way. I've never done much sponsorship, but I did in 2012 anyway, 12 in 12. I did 12 challenges over 12 months for Hope HIV, jumped out of a plane at the end of it. But I raised £5,000 because I don't fundraise very often. So and I wouldn't do it again really soon. I feel got to wait 2 or 3 years. And it got to a point when everyone in the world was saying fundraise, I'm running a 5K. There was too many people fundraising for sport. So I think it's almost like you wait and you keep your powder dry and you do it. And I think because I haven't asked people for anything in the past, or since 2012 probably is the last time I went to people and said, would you like to back something? That's like nearly 10 years on, isn't it? 8 years on. So I think therefore I felt I could ask, whereas I'm not sure I feel I could I would go and ask people again so soon now. One of the things you haven't asked, but I will, is about how the funding works. So when you publish a regular book, you might get given an advance. You might not, but you might get an advance of X many £1,000s, and then when the book starts selling, it kind of eats. You get that, well, by the very nature of it, called an advance, isn't it? You then get you don't get money for a long time as the book sells. So with crowdfunding, once the book is covered, the cost of the book is covered. So part of that extra raised can come to you, and I'm taking that in terms of free books to give away or promotional activity and so on. And then as it sells, you get a much higher percentage of the royalties. It's not really that much. That's about £2 a book or something. But in comparison to a regular publisher, it would be much less than that. So you do have the opportunity to make, once it's all covered and paid for, you have the opportunity. So you don't get the upfront money. So I have no advance. I haven't been given anything for the writing of it. I guess you've got to trust in the fact that your book's going to be successful. But it is a better relationship in terms of the royalty moving forward. And I probably had a bit more say, I've heard from other people, in terms of the book cover and how I want it laid out and whatever, because it is a bit of a joint publishing rather than it being I'm just working for a publisher.
So do you think if you did another book, you'd go down
I don't know.
self-publishing / crowd publishing?
I have thought I wouldn't do. I think I definitely will write another book, without doubt. I want to write another book. I don't like to write a fiction book. I thought I wouldn't do. And actually, when I saw this guy quite recently crowdfund and did really quickly, he got it through. I thought actually maybe there is something in, if people, I guess once people have got the book and they've enjoyed it and they've seen it, then maybe they would fund you again because they've seen the success of it and everything too. So I don't know the answer to that, but
yeah,
maybe.
we always say like you're better off. You'll do better in your second crowdfunding campaign than your first, because the first one, as much as I could tell you the strategy and everything, it obviously varies for every industry, every person, or your networks, or your contacts. But the second time you do a crowdfunding campaign, when you look at your crowd map, you already know who to not bother with.
Yeah.
Or you already know that one friend that's going to give on the last day.
Yeah.
And therefore you're at a much stronger position going forward. You already know what content does well. You know that you're really going to stick to Twitter.
Yeah.
You know that you're not going to do much in terms of like newsletters, let's say, if they didn't really work very well. And you know psychologically as well the ups and the downs.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're not going to have panics as much, and you're just going to ride them things out.
Yeah.
And so long as the world hasn't changed too much by then, things are going to go to a similar plan as they did.
Yeah.
But again, 725 people bought the book, read the book, enjoyed the book. Why wouldn't they buy a similar book in 2 years' time? Because they like you as an author, they like the topic you're writing about, even if it's fiction. If it was still to do with sports or women or something like that, then the majority of them would give again, and potentially give more, because they're like, actually, I'm going to buy this for my friend as well, but I also want one.
And I guess the theory also that is through the book, I mean, even in the last year, my profile has increased and my audience, so actually there should be a bigger audience to go to with the next book too. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
What's
So
this space?
You've got all of the audience that you already did, plus if you wait 2 years and think how many events you'll have actually gone to, how many schools you'll have spoken at, how many corporates you'd have spoken to about the book and all of those things. So obviously we'll be bigger the next time as well.
Yeah. So do people generally, I'm asking you a question, aren't I? It's not my interview. But do people generally what are the stats in terms of general crowdfunding? Do people usually, once they get a taste for it, they do more, or people
I'd say, I don't know any specific statistics, but I would say, again, like this, crowdfunding is a lot of work. If you just want the money, I always say never bother crowdfunding. Obviously, all the marketing alongside it's great. But even looking at it from a medium to longer term strategy, actually, all of this effort is going to be worth it if I do this 3 times over the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And then each one is going to raise more money, more money, more money. A lot of products do decide to just stick with crowdfunding as the launch, because they're like, well, we launched this product on crowdfunding, worked really well. So when we make a version 2 or we make an iteration or something, like, why wouldn't we just do the same thing again? Yeah. So a really good example of that is like Switch Bike, which it makes any bike an electric bike. They are maybe on their 3rd or 4th crowdfunding campaign, and each one, I think the first one raised about 328,000 and the second one raised 500,000, because each one just goes up and up, because all of the people that bought it clearly tell their friends or outcycle them and they're like jealous, so then they just keep kind of launching in these batches through crowdfunding.
And that's, I guess it's one of the key things that I haven't mentioned, but actually it's not about selling books, but although it's fabulous, there's 725 books, and actually it's more than that, because some people have bought a batch for school, they bought 10, they what have you. It's more about, they get their books early, so the people that have pledged will get their books in August. So actually in August, a couple of weeks before it's published and it's actually in the bookshops, there will be 1,000 people out there on social media and what have you, who become your storytellers, you're celebrating your what have you, who go out there and initially create that boost of both of sales, but also I guess to spread the word too. And I think that's really exciting, and I feel that they're part of something before it happens more widely.
Yeah, bringing them to like an ambassador role. I mean, if they're reading a book about women's sport, chances are many of their friends are also into women's sport.
Yeah.
So they're going to read it when they get it, tell their friends how great it is. They're not going to want to let their copy go. So they're going to be like, oh, you can go buy it in this store or online over here. And then obviously you'll get that second wave of marketing when it is available to buy publicly from all of their networks too.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the plan.
Wonderful. So, okay, 3 top tips for someone considering crowdfunding their first book. What would you suggest to them?
First book. I guess be realistic, sort of set your expectations. I think whilst I was very happy with how it went, I think that realizing that people won't give, especially from a basis of nothing. So I was happy, and they were really happy 3 months, but actually I couldn't believe why it wasn't funded, not in an arrogant way, but like, oh, I know so many people and it's going to be such a good book, why would you not? So I think that whole setting your expectations would be a kind of key one. And I think just thinking about the way in which you approach people, that you can't keep going out with the same piece of please buy my book. So, which I did a bit of the finding new content and topics and highlighting things that will be covered in it. So I guess, although I hadn't written it, knowing some of the areas that we covered was very key too. Yeah, I don't know really. I would say probably, I know it's not a top tip, is it? But thanking and recognising those that had done. So one of the things that was really effective for me was on the crowdfunding page, you could see who had given. So I hadn't seen this done before, but I took, and it was a bit of work because it wasn't all in one beautiful display, but I would take all the names of the people who had said they had given and create, well, I would do it in Canva today, but I wasn't using Canva, I was using PowerPoint, but create 4 or 5 photos that had everyone's names on, and then I would say thank you so much to my 260 people, thank you to my 500 one, and put that on social, and that always created a flurry of like, oh my god, I'm not on there, or so and so's on there, and what have you. So I think for me that was like a really effective way of just and thanking and celebrating those that had given, but also nudging those that hadn't to say, what, you know, why is your name not on this list? Because I'd like you to be.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing.
Pleasure.
And I think that anyone going to launch a crowdfunding campaign now for a book is going to have so much more awareness of what it's going to take to make it succeed. But I also think you haven't put them off. I think you've done it in a very like inspirational way that is only going to encourage people to now go and give it a go. Just before we say goodbye, like, where can people find the book? Where do you want people interested to go? And I'll make sure those links are underneath the YouTube.
Well, they can find the book anywhere at the moment, which is lovely. So it's now for pre-order. So you can still pledge through Unbound. But if you just want the book, then you can order it through all the usual outlets of Amazon, WH Smith, Waterstones, Barnes Noble, etc. So it is everywhere to pre-order. And then I guess in terms of other things people come and see, it'd be lovely if people listen to the Game Changers podcast. So that's across all podcast platforms. You can find that. And if you're a woman working in sport and listen to this lovely podcast, a lovely interview, come along to the Women's Sport Collective, which is a free network, say, for women working across sport, and we can put the details of that there too.
Perfect. And I definitely recommend coming along to that, because I've been to a few, and the things that you put out on there, the events and even the networking, are really amazing.
Excellent.
So
excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely to share the story, and yeah, I hope others come along in the future too.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing, and have a great day.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jess.